Okay, so you want to run an Airbnb empire. Here's the version everyone imagines. You buy a cute house near a beach or a mountain town, you furnish it nicely, you list it online, and strangers pay you two, three, sometimes four times what a regular monthly tenant would ever pay just to sleep there for a weekend. One long-term rental house might bring in $2,000 a month. That same house, run as a short-term rental, might bring in 5 or 6,000. Same walls, same roof, dramatically more money, just because you're renting it by the night instead of by the year. It sounds like a cheat code that regular landlords simply haven't discovered yet, and for a while, for a lot of people, it genuinely was. Short-term rental income exploded over the last decade, and hosts on major platforms have collectively earned tens of billions of dollars a year. Entire small towns have had their local housing markets reshaped by investors chasing this exact math. Buy a house, list it, and let the nightly premium do the work that decades of appreciation used to do. So naturally, you assume running an Airbnb is basically owning a rental house with better pricing. Same property, just charge more per night instead of per month. But here's what actually happens once you look inside a real short-term rental's monthly numbers, once cities start passing regulations and the algorithm starts changing who gets seen. By the end of this, you will know exactly how much of that premium nightly rate survives all the way to actual profit, why occupancy is a completely different beast than long-term renting, and why a growing number of cities are quietly making this business model illegal in the exact neighborhoods that used to be gold mines for it. People assume the extra income from short-term renting is basically free money on top of a normal rental. It is not. Not really. Running a short-term rental is not landlording, it's hospitality, and hospitality comes with an entirely different set of costs a long-term rental never has to deal with. Think of the difference like this. A long-term landlord signs one tenant to a lease and mostly steps back for a year. A short-term host is essentially running a tiny, constantly rotating hotel, and every single guest triggers a fresh set of expenses that a landlord with a 12-month tenant never even has to think about. The first and biggest of these hidden costs is cleaning and turnover. Every time a guest checks out, the property needs a full professional clean before the next guest arrives, often within just a few hours. On a typical 2 or 3 bedroom home, a cleaning service can run somewhere between $150 and $300 per turn. And on a popular property with frequent weekend bookings, that can mean 8, 10, even 15 cleanings in a single month. Multiply that out, and cleaning alone can eat $500 to $1,500 a month, a cost that simply does not exist for a landlord with one tenant staying a full year. The second cost is furnishing and restocking, and it never actually ends. Unlike a long-term rental where a tenant brings their own furniture and replaces their own light bulbs, a short-term rental has to be fully furnished, decorated, and stocked with linens, toiletries, coffee, and kitchen basics from day one, an upfront cost that can run anywhere from $15,000 to $40,000 depending on the size and style of the property. Then it has to be continuously restocked and periodically replaced because towels wear out, dishes break, and mattresses need replacing far more often when dozens of different guests are using them every single month instead of one family. The third cost, and the one that quietly determines whether the whole business actually works, is platform fees and dynamic taxes. Booking platforms typically charge hosts somewhere between 3 and 5% of the booking. Plus, guests usually pay their own separate service fee on top, which doesn't hurt the host directly, but does push up the effective price a guest sees, sometimes cooling demand. On top of that, most cities and counties charge a specific short-term rental occupancy tax, sometimes called a transient occupancy tax, often somewhere between 8 and 15% of the nightly rate, a tax that simply doesn't exist for long-term rentals at all, and one that has to either be absorbed by the host or passed along to guests who are already comparing your listing's total price against a dozen others. This brings us to the metric that actually determines whether any of this math works. Occupancy rate, the percentage of nights in a year the property is actually booked, and this number is wildly different from vacancy in the long-term rental world. A long-term rental sitting empty for 2 weeks between tenants is a minor inconvenience. A short-term rental only booked 40% of nights in a year means it's sitting empty and earning zero more than half the time, while the mortgage, insurance, and utilities keep running every single day regardless. Top-performing short-term rental markets can see annual occupancy rates in the 60 to 70% range, but plenty of oversaturated markets, ones where too many investors chase the same trendy neighborhood at once, have seen average occupancy drop into the 30 to 40% range as supply outpaced actual travel demand. And then there's the risk that has quietly ended this business model in entire neighborhoods almost overnight: regulation. Cities across the country, from New York to Los Angeles to countless smaller tourist towns, have passed increasingly strict short-term rental ordinances, some requiring hosts to live on the property themselves, some capping the total number of nights a home can be rented per year, some banning non-owner occupied short-term rentals entirely within residential zones. An investor who bought a property specifically for its short-term rental income can find themselves suddenly forced back into the long-term rental market at a fraction of the income, sometimes with a mortgage payment that was only ever calculated to work at the higher nightly rate. This regulatory risk is arguably the single largest threat in this entire business, and it's one almost no first-time host researches before they buy. Financing and insurance add another layer of cost most beginners never budget for either. Many traditional mortgage lenders are hesitant to count projected short-term rental income the same way they'd count a signed long-term lease, which is why a growing niche of lenders now offer what's called a DSCR loan specifically built around short-term rental projections, essentially asking whether the property's likely booking income alone can cover the mortgage payment, similar to how apartment buildings get financed, but usually at a slightly higher interest rate than a standard mortgage to compensate the lender for the extra uncertainty. On top of that, a standard homeowner's insurance policy typically does not cover a property being rented out to strangers on a nightly basis. Hosts need a specific short-term rental or commercial hospitality policy, which usually costs noticeably more than a typical landlord policy and is a line item first-time hosts frequently forget to budget for until their claim gets denied. There's also a lower capital version of this business worth knowing about, called rental arbitrage, where instead of buying a property outright, an operator signs a long-term lease on a house or apartment with the landlord's explicit permission to sublet it short-term, then furnishes it and runs it exactly like an owned Airbnb. This dramatically lowers the upfront capital needed. No down payment, no mortgage, just furnishing costs and the first month's rent. But it also means the operator doesn't benefit from any appreciation or loan paydown at all. Their entire return comes purely from the spread between the nightly income and the fixed monthly rent they owe the landlord, and that spread can vanish instantly if the landlord decides not to renew the lease. Now let's put real numbers next to two very different Airbnb operators. In the good scenario, an investor buys a 3-bedroom house near a popular lake destination for $350,000 in a town with clear, stable short-term rental regulations already in place. They spend $25,000 furnishing it well, invest in professional photography, and price competitively against similar listings. The property books at 65% occupancy across the year at an average nightly rate of $220, generating roughly $52,000 a year in gross booking revenue. After cleaning, platform fees, occupancy tax, utilities, and a maintenance reserve along with the mortgage on the property, the owner nets around $18,000 a year in cash flow, on top of the property appreciating and the mortgage slowly being paid down by the guest's rent money the entire time. That's a genuinely strong return relative to what the same house would earn as a long-term rental. In the realistic, harder scenario, an investor buys a similar house in a trendier, more competitive market where dozens of other investors had the exact same idea over the previous 2 years. Supply outpaces demand, and to stay booked at all, the investor is forced to drop their nightly rate well below what they originally projected. Occupancy lands closer to 35%, and midway through the year, the city passes a new ordinance requiring short-term rental permits that cap non-owner-occupied rentals, forcing the investor to either apply for a limited permit through a lottery system or convert the property to a long-term rental generating half the income they'd budgeted for. Between the lower occupancy, the price cuts, and the sudden regulatory shift, that property goes from a projected $18,000 annual profit to an actual loss of several $1,000s once every cost is accounted for, on the exact same size mortgage payment that doesn't care what the regulations decided to do. The zoom-out truth about running an Airbnb empire is this. The nightly rate premium is real, but it's not free money. It's payment for running an actual hospitality operation, cleaning, restocking, guest communication, and constant repricing, layered on top of real regulatory risk that a long-term rental almost never faces. The hosts who actually build lasting income from this treat it like a small hospitality business with real operating systems, not like a rental house that happens to charge by the night, and the ones who research local regulation before they buy are the ones who don't end up owning an expensive house they can no longer legally rent the way they plan to. Every property type in this series so far has had one thing in common. You're renting to one household at a time, whether that's a long-term tenant, 100 apartment tenants, or a rotating cast of weekend guests. There's a completely different corner of real estate where you don't rent out one home at a time at all. You own the land underneath dozens of homes other people already own and collect a check from every single one of them every single month without ever touching a toilet, a roof, or a renovation. That's exactly where we're headed next, into the surprisingly quiet economics of owning a mobile home park.